AM 1260 KOIC live. We are here at Kiwanis. We've got some great news for you. The streaming provider got the problem fixed. We are now providing live streaming video on our Facebook page, KOIC Radio, and also our website, koic.us. So if you want to watch, in fact, we're streaming video live right now. So if you want to watch what's going on, you see people eating. And in fact, we're also sending audio so you can hear the plates and so on and so forth. So everybody's eating right now. What you're going to be hearing live on the radio and live on the YouTube stream, KOIC.us, KOIC Radio on Facebook, is today's candidates forum. There's the candidates for Yamhill County District Attorney. Next week, we are going to be having live broadcast and live video webcast on the two candidates for Yamhill County Commissioner. So we're looking forward to doing that. We do want to stress that we will have this morning video from the county commission meeting. And
good afternoon. I want to welcome everybody to today's forum. Would you all join me in turning off your cell phones and turning them down, please? And remember that we will be live on the radio. Okay. Let's do the Pledge of Allegiance, and then Jim will do an invocation.
This is KOIC, McMinnville, Newburgh.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I have this thought for today from Mahatma Gandhi. It is the action and not the fruit of the action that is important. We have to do the right thing. We may never know what results come from our actions, but if we do nothing, there will be no result. Now, may we leave this room today motivated to the right another wrong in our world, no matter how large or small that action may be. Now bless this food to our use and us to your service. Amen.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, Steve, I think we'd like to just go ahead and get this going as soon as possible. We'll give them as much time as possible. Okay, well, we're having the second of our three candidate forums today. We had the assessor's race, assessor's candidates last week, the county assessor candidates. Today we have the county district attorney candidates, the first time we've had a contested district attorney race in a long time. And next week we'll have the county commissioner race. The ballots go out on the 28th, which is the date of our forum next week. And we have three head-to-head races in the county this year. This set of forums, as in past years, for a number of years, a kind of a local tradition, are being sponsored by the local media. We have Dave Adams here with KLYC Radio, and he's live streaming it. And we have Jerry Eichten with McMinnville Community Media, and Paul Dakwani's representing the News Register. We flipped a coin, and Alicia turned up the right one, so she's going to lead off. We'll have 2-minute opening statements, and then John Gray, retired longtime Yamhill County Council, will lead the questioning. He's got enough questions to keep things going, but anybody who wants to throw one in, I put little slips of paper around on the tables, and if you need more, or if people over here want to ask questions, I can get you some slips. If you would just kind of signal to me if you've got a question written out, I'll come around and pick them up and I'll feed them to John. He will either ignore them or feed them into his routine as his judgment fits. He's the guy in charge, and we'll take it from there. So if we can get maybe the candidates come on up and grab the chairs up here, and Alicia, you can start right off.
With the opening statements, Alicia will go first. She'll have 2 minutes. Then Brad will make his opening statement. And Then Brad will get the first question after opening statements.
I don't know if I actually introduced these people, but Liz Egan is the deputy district attorney, and Brad Berry is the district attorney. These are the
I've said this to some of you already, and recently a defense attorney thanked me for filing for this position. He reminded me that many years ago, he and I were chatting, and I told him some of my thoughts on the democratic process. And some of those thoughts are that elections are the job performance reviews for elected officials, and that when an incumbent runs repeatedly, unopposed, there is no opportunity for anyone to ask their questions or to get answers. Lots of people don't have access or don't think they have access in a public place to ask their questions. I've devoted my adult life to the criminal justice system. As a prosecutor, as a teacher at Chemeketa and with law enforcement, and as a citizen. Filing for this office was not something I had ever thought I would do. I've told Brad over the years, I don't want your job, I'm not going to run against you. But after being asked about it years and years, I finally decided that because of my beliefs in how the system works, that I had to do that. I have not enjoyed it, and for many fleeting moments, I have regretted it. But I am proud that I did it because I gave an opportunity to others to ask their questions. I don't disagree with major policies of our office. If I did, I would talk to Brad about it. I know there are other people that do, and I wanted them to have an opportunity to feel heard in ways that they told me they didn't feel. My complaints, my personal complaints with the office and with Mr. Berry have to do more with little management issues that don't affect many people outside the office. However, they are very important to those of us who are hardworking, dedicated employees, and we would like them addressed. I would like them addressed. I made the mistake of allowing some to infer that I was speaking for them. I was not. My colleagues crossed the lines. Defense attorneys, prosecutors, defendants, witnesses, grand jurors, and the citizens. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Lots of friendly faces here. As I look back on my time as DA, one of my most favorite times that I have is being out in the community and talking with the service groups. I think most of you know I try to present to most service groups at least once a year, and it's a good chance to share what we do in our office and answer questions there. As I start, thank you for inviting me to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about what we do and how we do it and answer your questions. I have to start by introducing my wife, Lou, who is with me and who has been my wife since March 10th of 1990. So thank you, darling, for coming. When I first ran for this office began my campaign in 1995, I made several promises, and I'm pretty proud to say that I've kept those. We've had an emphasis in the office on protecting the vulnerable citizens in our community, an emphasis on dealing with domestic violence, which is in all portions of our community without exception. I made a commitment when I first ran to victims of crime, and I'm proud to say, and I've got Deb Bridges here, who is my Victim Services Director, proud to say that we have the foremost Victim Services office in the state. And in fact, I can tell you many DAs come and watch what we do and take what we do and take it back home. And I'm proud of what we do with victims and for victims, because they are the only part of the system, the only person in the system who is there not by their own choice. The rest of us choose to be involved in the criminal justice system. Just as Alicia mentioned, her choice to be a prosecutor, we choose to do it. They do not. I'm proud that I've been endorsed by Crime Victims United as a, quote, proven leader advocating on behalf of victims of crime in Yamhill County, Oregon, and nationally. I'm proud of the law enforcement leadership who has stepped up and endorsed my candidacy. Every chief and sheriff in the county who have endorsed my candidacy. I think that says what I'd like to say is I've tried to be a leader in the law enforcement community. I've worked hard to collaborate with law enforcement community, and I worked very hard in my office to see that we get a just result for all of those involved in the criminal justice system and not just a result. Thank you.
Brad, you get the first question.
Whoa, I'm back.
And it's to see if you watched the replay of the assessors forum last week, because it's the same opening question.
And I did not.
Uh-oh. What are the 3 most important characteristics of a good district attorney?
I think first, a good district attorney has to have the ability to walk. I just mentioned getting a just result. Our main job is achieving justice, not convictions, not sentences. It's to achieve justice. And sometimes that's a very delicate line for us to walk. Working with victims, working with defense attorneys, working with defendants, and working with law enforcement, we have the obligation to first see that we treat similarly situated people similarly, but we can't get to a point where policies and how we do things usually never takes into account the individual defendant and the individual circumstances. So that's one. Secondly, I think we have to have a leadership role, the ability to step out, to learn what others are doing, to bring ideas home to both law enforcement and to the office, and to lead in change in the community is important, and we need to have that leadership. And along with leadership comes the ability to collaborate with all of the people in the criminal justice system. That includes law enforcement, it includes the courts, it includes treatment, for example, it includes probation and parole. Every segment of the community justice system expects the district attorney to collaborate and be part of those decisions. And lastly, and I think I've learned this more in the last 5 years, probably over the first 15 as DA, is I think we need to continually challenge what we do and how we do it. I think the ability to look at our usual practices and to look at business as usual must be challenged. We currently are in a climate nationally, statewide, and I think voices locally, where people are saying, are we incarcerating too many people too long? Are we, in fact, dealing with people the way we've always done it just because we've always done it that way? And I think we have to be willing and open to listen to new ideas and find ways that reduce recidivism, not just hold people accountable for their behavior, which is our primary function.
Thank you. Now it's your turn, Alicia. And the question is, what are the 3 most important characteristics of a good DA?
That is correct. And as I said before, I don't have major policy differences with Mr. Berry. We've worked together for over 16 years. The only thing I would add is that as the district attorney, you also need to have a commitment and a leadership to your staff and which includes both the secretaries and the support staff and the attorneys, as well as the crime victims advocates. You need to be aware of how they're working together, whether or not they're working together, and spend the time and be committed to helping that so that we can all do all of the things that Brad mentioned in his 3 points.
Thanks. Now, question number 2, Alicia goes first. And Brad will go second. In this race, one issue has been whether the district attorney should be an active participant in state and national DA organizations. Is active participation in these organizations a benefit to the citizens of Yamhill County? Why or why not?
Yes, and I think I actually might have been one to bring that up. Mr. Berry is involved in both national and state and local, all of those organizations. I remember when I first started, I was real proud to be part of an office with someone who was out there that much. However, over the years, it has seemed that commitment to those organizations has overshadowed commitment to those of us who remain behind in the office. I would like to see, it's been stated, more coming back to us from those. If someone from the office goes to a training, the DDAs usually bring back materials. Mr. Berry goes and he teaches and he attends, I would like to see more of that coming back to help us. There's nothing wrong with being involved, but your office needs to come first, and sometimes I feel that it does not.
Thanks. Brad, the question is active participation in the state and national DA's organizations a benefit to the citizens of Yamhill County? Why or why not?
Not only is it a benefit, I think it should be a requirement of DAs. I don't know of any of the district attorneys in the state that don't participate in the Oregon District Attorneys Association. I've been privileged to be voted by my colleagues in the state to be our state representative to the National District Attorneys Association. When I mention challenging what we do and how we do it, that's how you find out. You go out and see what other people are doing, and those are the ideas that you bring back, and not just to the office, but you bring them back to the county as a whole. Let me start by saying my commitment to the office I don't think has ever wavered. I spend more hours in the office, I think, per week on average than anybody. My average work week is 50 hours. I'm not complaining about it. I don't brag about it. It's a fact. I'm in my office between 6 and 6:30 every morning, and most days I'm the last one or second to last one to leave the office. When I'm out at a conference or I'm out at the DA's Association or National DA's Association, I participate in the committees. I get ideas from what other people are doing, and I bring those home. And let me just give you a couple of examples. One, I think all of you here know, and the Kiwanis know of our Comfort Dog, our courthouse dog project. That is in Yamhill County, and we're the only county in this state that has it. Why? Because I was approached as the chair of the National District Attorneys Association Victims Crime Committee. I was approached as that chair to present that idea there. That idea came to me first. I brought back an idea presented from the El Paso District Attorney's Office on a different way to approach investigation on domestic violence cases. I brought it to Newburgh-Dundee Police Department as a pilot project for the domestic violence response team. We've reduced trials on domestic violence cases, those cases that go to trial as often as any other. My DV deputy says we try between 40 and 60% of those cases. We tried less than 15% of the cases out of the Newburgh-Dundee when using the new investigative technique that I brought home. In about 1999, I brought home the idea of creating throughout the county a major crime response team. That came from a meeting I was at. I brought it to law enforcement administrators. Each of them agreed it was a good idea, and we put it together. And it has been a primary, effective, investigative team in this county for every major crime we've had since that time.
Thanks. You get question 3 first, Brad. I'm trying to confuse you.
No, it's just you sit down. I'm done. I'm going. So, all right, go ahead.
All right. There are 33 inmates on death row in Oregon, including one from Yamhill County.
Mr. Sparks.
Several on death row have been there for almost 30 years. The last execution by the state was about 20 years ago. An inmate scheduled to be executed 5 years ago was not, after then Governor Kitzhaber issued a moratorium on executions. Does the death penalty still make sense in Oregon? Why or why not?
The death penalty has been endorsed and reinstated by the voters of this state overwhelmingly. I think it's been done twice now since the Supreme Court authorized the reinstatement of the death penalty. So I think clearly the voters of the state feel that it is a penalty which should be a potential penalty in the right cases. I've had to make the hard decisions through my career as your district attorney on whether or not we seek the death penalty. And I made that decision with Jeffrey Dana Sparks, who killed 12-year-old Lacey Rabancho in 1999 when he lured her to his home, sexually assaulted her through the middle of the night, and then strangled her and left her dead beside the railroad tracks in Lafayette. That wasn't a hard decision for me based on what he did and his prior background. I did so, though, with the knowledge that actually having somebody executed in the state is not likely to happen. You need to know that when the jurors of Yamhill County authorized the death penalty for Mr. Sparks, it was the first time in over 100 years, if I recall correctly, that a Yamhill County jury had made a death penalty finding. Over 100 years. And I had to make that call. I did it because I thought it was the right thing to do, and I still think it was the right thing to do. Now, whether or not he's ever executed is something that is beyond me. That has become politics. And Governor Kitzhaber, if I faulted him for anything on his decision to put the moratorium on the death penalty, it was for not declaring it when he ran for office. He should have stood up and said, that's what I'm going to do, so that the voters would understand that. The death penalty and actual execution, that's a bit redundant there, of the death penalty in Oregon has somewhat become muddied both by politics and by a legal process that is never ending. And that's wrong. That's wrong for victims. And as I look at choosing whether or not we should go after the death penalty in the future, I'm going to have hard discussions with victims about how long do you want this case coming back to you over and over again. That's where I will look and spend a lot of time talking about it.
Thank you. Alicia, the question is, does the death penalty still make sense in Oregon? Why or why not?
Yes, I believe the death penalty still has its place in the criminal justice system in Oregon and elsewhere. That's it.
Okay. The next question is Alicia's. What are the considerations you'd use to determine whether a case should be prosecuted by a DA's office from another county instead of a prosecutor from Yamhill County?
You mean a conflict case?
Well, I could fill in some stuff, but I don't want to. So.
Right. The beginning words again.
Let me read it again. What are the considerations you'd use to determine whether a case should be prosecuted by a DA's office from another county instead of a prosecutor from Yamhill County?
Well, I think what that primarily gets at is if there's a conflict of interest, either with one of our prosecutors or Mr. Berry or even someone within our office. And that needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. I know on occasion I have felt uncomfortable prosecuting a case because I knew the victim, the defendant, someone involved, and I brought that to Mr. Berry's attention. It's up to him at that point, or whoever is the district attorney, to make the decision of whether that conflict affects just that person or the entire office. I know in private practices, you wall someone off if they have a conflict, if it's possible. There are some conflicts that just seem so obvious throughout the office that a case should be transferred without question. I know I prosecute cases in other counties where I frequently wonder why. You know, there's a conflict, but it's so small, it does not seem like it's worth me traveling to another county to prosecute it. But that's not my decision to make, it was theirs. And sometimes even a small conflict has the potential to make a case look like it's not being handled correctly. And so each one needs to be looked at individually to see how it's perceived within our office, by the defense, and most of all by the community, to make sure that we would be handling it appropriately, but to make sure everyone is comfortable with how it's being handled.
Thanks. Brad, what are the considerations you'd use to determine whether a case should be prosecuted by a DA's office from another county instead of a prosecutor from Yamhill County?
There are two types of conflicts, and I'm speaking to the choir for the lawyers in the room. There are actual conflicts and perceived conflicts. An actual conflict, whereas in fact you would have a prejudice or a bias somehow in the prosecution of the case, or somebody in your office might. And then actual conflict is one that we always farm out. We always ask, I always approach one of my colleagues from typically an adjacent county and ask them whether or not they would have the bandwidth to take on the case and would take on that case for us. More often, though, and this is something Alicia was talking about, is we end up in a situation of a perceived conflict. And that can be a case where there is just, we know the person, or we have some type of, let me back up there. We always know people. This is not that large of a county, so it's not uncommon that we have some familiarity with a person we might be charging. But where they've had some other context, something beyond that, a relative. We have one where one of my staff came and said their stepson or their son is involved in it. And, you know, I have to look at those and decide how close is it? Should we send it off? But I think and again, kudos to Alicia for this, it's the perception. We want to ensure that the community knows that we're treating people fairly and they're not getting some treatment because of who they are or who they know. And that is a perception of that it won't be done right, rather than we actually wouldn't do it right. We would. But those will be farmed out. And it can come the other way too. We handle cases for other counties when they have that. And it's an agreement we have between counties to ensure that everybody continues to have utmost faith in the criminal justice system, doing the right things for the right reasons.
Thanks. Next question is yours, Brad, first. For the majority of records maintained by local government entities in Yamhill County, like the county, the cities, and school districts, the DA is responsible to decide whether the records are open to inspection by the public. As district attorney, are there any considerations you'd use to decide whether to release a record to the public other than strictly the statutory criteria?
I wonder who gave you this question. Mr. Bagwell and the rest of you. I kid Steve because we've had many requests from the News Register for public records. First, the statute dictates, and I think to just say we just follow the statute really ignores, I think, the policy behind the statute. There was a lot of discussion in the legislature this last session about transparency related to records, and it all came out of kind of the Kitzhaber thing from last year. And I think we have to recognize that the general perception, the general rule is public records are public. They're for public inspection. We're public entities doing work for the public, and the public has a right to review and see what we do. However, there are exceptions to public records, and the statute sets forth many of them for records which are not subject to public disclosure. When you look at those, they are subject to interpretation. And that's where if I'm arm wrestling with Steve or Jeb over a request that's come to the county, and the county, a department in the county has said no, they're saying no because they think this exception says, no, we don't have to disclose it. And the kind of the broader point that the paper often makes is just because there's an exception to the public records doesn't mean that you have to withhold it. That's not my call. My call as district attorney when the appeal comes to me is whether or not an exception, you don't have to disclose it, applies or it doesn't apply. Some of those exceptions are very poorly written and hard to determine, but some of them have a balancing in them. What's the balance of not releasing it versus releasing it? Who do we harm? Do we harm innocent people by releasing certain documents that could potentially be released? And I will tell you, having done this many, many, many times over the last 20 years, those can be very difficult decisions to weigh. However, the one piece about just because you can withhold it doesn't mean you should, and I think I differ from my friends at the News Register and others who've made the request, is that's not my call. The agency says we have an exception, we're standing by it. The exception applies, it applies.
Thanks, Alicia. The question is, as district attorney, are there any considerations you'd use to decide whether to release a record to the public other than strictly the statutory criteria?
The short answer is no. Normally, this would not be something that I would do a lot of as a deputy district attorney. I have handled public records requests in Mr. Berry's absence over the years. The first one was actually just a couple years after I'd started, so I have familiarity there. Some of you know I also was Mr. Berry's attorney for a while. I represented him in a civil case having to do with public records issues. I made the mistake of taking a vacation at the wrong time, and when I came back, I was appointed.
Don't miss a meeting.
I learned a lot during that. That went on for over a year. I was privy to some stuff that I wouldn't normally see, some records, a lot of stuff. The one thing I learned from that. And I think it's relevant to my having filed for this office. Is one of the things I suggested after that was clear policies and procedures for the submission of records requests to our office. Because Mr. Berry isn't always there and can't always handle these, there needs to be a policy that we follow. I know what needs to be done because I know every in and out of it. And when Mr. Berry said poorly written and hard to determine, that's not the half of it. But I think it does, depending on your interpretation, and if someone doesn't like the DA's office interpretation, there are ways to go about having that reviewed. But I think our job, as Mr. Berry has stated, is to follow the statutes. And once an agency says they don't want to reveal it, if we determine that it is covered and is a public record that should be provided, that should be our ruling. We should not be making other calls outside the statutes. That's not our assigned job. But that would be easier if we had it laid out, not how the questions are answered, but how they are submitted to our office. And that is part of the statutes, and it should be done.
Thank you. This one's yours too, Alicia. We're going to confuse you all afternoon. Do you feel the Yamhill County DA's office is equally fair to victims of crimes and persons charged with committing crimes? If not, should any office procedures be changed?
I don't know that I understand the question. What does it mean to be fair? I mean,
well, I can read it one more time, but I'm not going to fill it in.
I guess my answer is not quite understanding the question.
Well, let me try this.
We treat them appropriately at every turn based on our abilities. And I know on occasion, the prosecutors in our office we find ourselves in a position where we're protecting the defendant's rights also, making sure things are done right. And that's part of our ethics and our oath when we became lawyers. It's also part of our oath when we became prosecutors. We swore to uphold the laws of the state, the county, and the country. And we can't do that if everyone's rights aren't protected. And sometimes, in some places, victims' rights aren't protected. But as Mr. Berry went into detail, in our county, we do a really good job. We have a really good staff, and we do focus on their rights. At the same time, we understand that in order to get a proper resolution, we have to make sure that the defendant's rights aren't violated also. And sometimes those are cross purposes. And it's also not easy to accommodate every victim's requests. Two victims of the very same crime may have very different reactions to it. And we need to be fair to the defendant regardless of which extreme a victim may go to. And we need to, but at the same time, respecting that they have the right to their opinion and their feelings. I think we are fair in both, and I can't think of any specific changes that I would suggest be made.
Okay, Brad, do you feel that the DA's office is equally fair to victims of crimes and persons charged with committing crimes? If not, should any office procedures be changed?
We better be. And no, I don't think we need to change any policies. Let me start with the defendant. Alicia's accurate. We have a legal and ethical obligation to treat the defendant fairly. We have, as I mentioned before, we have an obligation to treat similarly situated defendants similarly. We don't pick on you because you have blue eyes or brown eyes or gray hair or no hair. That's not our job. But we do look individually, and that gets to obtaining justice, not just fairness. Additionally, as I have said from early on, we have concentrated since the start of my career as your district attorney with seeing that victims have as much involvement in the system as they can have. In fact, when the ballot measure was passed last one was passed, and I'm losing 2008-ish, something like that, which created a constitutional right of enforcement for a victim, not just rights that the victims had. I don't think we had to change a single policy or a single procedure in our office. We were already doing all of those things. We involve victims early on. My lawyers will all tell you that in our major cases, when they come talk to me about the case, and every single one of them, I said, what's the victim's position? And Alicia's right, we can't always make victims happy. It's not uncommon that victims want more out of a sentence than we can legally get, or that would be a just result, or they want much less than we think is appropriate for the offense. And so that's a tension within the system that we deal with. I have personally dealt with victims of all kinds of crimes since I've been DA. We try to involve them as much as we can. That's our job. I think it really is our job to ensure that a victim has not just a role in the criminal justice system, but a meaningful role in the system.
Next question is yours, so glad to see you're still up there.
Thank you. I'm trainable.
All right, this is your trial lawyer question. Assume that you've just finished prosecuting a case and made your closing argument. In her closing argument, the defense attorney tells the jury that her client can't be convicted because there is evidence that another person may have committed the crime. You have 2 minutes to persuade the jury, or this forum audience, that the defense attorney hasn't created reasonable doubt just because another person may have committed the crime. Proceed.
Did not. In all cases that we try before juries, the argument that the defense makes is that there's a doubt. And ladies and gentlemen, the doubt that is before you, there can be doubt about anything. You can have two witnesses who stand side by side and relay to you what they saw and what they recall of seeing it. And those two versions are never the same. Does that mean that one person is lying and another person is telling the truth? Of course it doesn't. But when you weigh the evidence before you, you have to look at the totality of the evidence before you, not just a single assertion by defense counsel that somebody else may have done it. You look at the evidence before you to determine who did it. What evidence do you have? From there, I would point out said evidence against the defendant and lay it out piece by piece. And we've all had to do this. Alicia's had to do it. She's scheduled to do it today. We've all had to do that, where piece by piece you show, in fact, it wasn't this person, it's the person that we've charged. And by laying out the evidence piece by piece, you eventually, not only do you eliminate doubt, but you begin to throw shadow on the doubt. So it's interesting that the term is proof beyond a reasonable doubt, but it's not, ladies and gentlemen, proof beyond a shadow of a doubt. The evidence convinces you that this person did it. Was somebody else involved? Did they have some involvement? They may have, but your decision today is whether or not this person committed this offense on this date.
Thank you. When you went to celebrate, when you come out, I got to grab your water.
Thank you. Now it's Alicia's turn. Alicia, you have 2 minutes to persuade the jury, this forum audience, that the defense attorney has not created reasonable doubt just because another person may have committed the crime. Proceed.
She has said that someone else did it. But that's not what the evidence says. And as the judge told you at the beginning, and will tell you again, the words of the attorneys are not evidence. I ask you, as I did at the beginning of this case, to consider the evidence. What is the evidence? The evidence is the physical items. The evidence is the testimony of witnesses you find credible, and you are the ones who find whether or not a witness is credible when they testify before you and their story changes, when they make up answers that might fit better what they think they're supposed to say. The evidence in this case establishes who's guilty. And it's not this mysterious person in a van who drove up and grabbed the keys and ran off with them. It's the defendant. The evidence tells you it was the defendant. Look at each piece, consider each word that was spoken by a witness. And after you've done that, apply it to the law that the judge has given you. and I ask that you find the defendant guilty.
Thank you. Now we'll get back to questions. Alicia, for purposes of the Oregon Tort Claims Act, deputy DAs are agents of the state, not the county. Is this good public policy? Why or why not?
I don't know. Fortunately, we haven't had a big issue with tort claims filed against us. I was once sued years ago by a gentleman sued in federal court, me, Judge Stone, Mr. Sanai, several other people. Judge Stone and I shared a defense attorney. He wanted 500 pieces of gold for every day I continued my bad behavior. My husband's response was, ooh, we're gonna be poor. My kids wanted to know if they could pay it in doubloons. We were represented by a state attorney, and that really is my only experience with that. And that's kind of, it's not directly a tort claim, but I'll let Mr. Berry answer the question.
Thank you, Alicia. Brad, for purposes of the Oregon Tort Claims Act, deputy DAs are agents of the state, not the county. Is this good public policy? Why or why not?
I had the opportunity of being able to sit and think about this question a second. So I think it is good policy, and it's for a couple of reasons. One, we represent the state of Oregon. We don't represent Yamhill County. It's the state of Oregon versus John Doe or Sally Smith. It's not Yamhill County. So secondly, I'm a state, it may not seem like it because it's limited to voters within Yamhill County, but I am a state elected official. And my position is dictated in the Constitution and in state statutes to represent the state in criminal actions. So I think they're in and of itself. Let's talk pragmatically, though. In a situation where we may get sued or a tort claim comes, they come in big packages, because the typical allegation against a district attorney's office or a district attorney's action deals with incarcerating people potentially for long periods of time for something they didn't do. Now, we've had tort claim acts and we've had accusations made against us that have always been dismissed. That happens. That's not an uncommon thing to any office. But to require the county to defend against that, I think could potentially cause a significant hardship for a county. Maybe not a Multnomah, Clackamas, Washington, Marion, Deschutes County that have a lot of money to pay for defense. But what if we had a small county like Grant County or Sherman County where a lawsuit came against the district attorney or one of their deputies? The ability to defend would become very expensive. And it's not just defense in state courts typically, it's defense, as Alicia mentioned, suits, 1893 suits in federal court. Not only expensive, but require a lot of expertise. I think the combination of that makes sense, that you have a central entity, the Attorney General's office, that would represent claims against the state agents, district attorneys, in a consistent way, whether they're filed in state court or in federal court. And I think that would be harder for counties to do with a rare claim against an individual doing what we do day in and day out.
Thanks, Brad. I have one question left, and there was one question that was just submitted, but I'll ask that person to refer that to the person who was going to get the question. Is the sheriff here? Or did
He
the
was
sheriff
here.
leave?
He's got a budget thing that's starting at 1 o'clock. He had to leave.
Well, here's the last question. And I've had different answers from different elected officials on
I
this.
can guess where you're going, John.
Who is the chief law enforcement officer of the county, the DA or the sheriff? Why?
It depends on who you ask. If you ask the sheriff, he'll tell you the sheriff. I will tell you, Jack Crabtree and I had this debate many times, quietly and friendly, I might say. It may have involved a beer on occasion, but we had the debate. And I think here's what it is. There's a constitutional basis, state constitutional basis for the sheriff's position. I think the sheriffs have held that to say that because of how they are set forth in the Constitution, that they are the lead law enforcement officer in the county. However, I've taken the position that you might be the one who has the gold handcuffs, but nothing happens in prosecution on a criminal case without the approval and adoption of the district attorney. So ultimately, a decision to prosecute, a decision to hold somebody accountable for criminal conduct is one that's made by the district attorney. Law enforcement has a very difficult job. They make decisions every minute of every day, and they arrest people for the belief that they've committed a crime. But ultimately, to prosecute, to obtain justice in a particular case, may dictate that we don't prosecute, may dictate we make a decision that in light of the facts of this case and the individuals involved, prosecution is not the right thing to do. That's not a decision that necessarily law enforcement has to make on the street at the time that the handcuffs come out. That's a decision we make. And since ultimately the district attorney is making the decision to prosecute or not, I think ultimately the district attorney has that one step up on the rung of the ladder.
Thank you. And the sheriff's not here to answer the question, so I'll ask Alicia. Alicia, who is the chief law enforcement officer of the county? The DA or the sheriff? Why?
I don't think it matters, and in this context, and I don't know that it's always healthy to ask that. When I interviewed for this job, I shared with my interview panel, Mr. Berry was on it, various people who've now retired, that I had interned at the Yellowstone County Attorney's Office when I was in law school, and I experienced a situation where the DA's office and law enforcement did not get along, just in general. All the agencies, DA's office, they still had to work together, but there was an animosity, an aggression, that it just was not helpful to the criminal justice system. And when I was interviewing for a job, coming out of the Court of Appeals, I had a number of interviews, and that was one of the first things I did my research on was, what was the relationship between the DA's office and local law enforcement? Because I wasn't going to go back there again. I wasn't going to fight that struggle to reach a just resolution when the parties involved in getting there were not working together. We don't have that here. Yeah, there's some difficulties now and then, maybe a discussion about who's on top, but really, we work together. They understand that we have a different type of decision to make than that they do. And sometimes they use that to their advantage. I will get a call from someone saying, you know, this is kind of iffy. It looks like it might be civil, but both parties are real upset. Can I tell them I'm sending it to you for review? And we say yes, because that gives a second look. It lets the citizens know that everybody is working together to get the right result. And I think that is one of the excellent things about this county. Can I?
Appreciate that. All right, those are all the questions. Now we're going to have closing statements. And this will be 2 minutes. Alicia will go first, and then Brad will have 2 minutes, and then we'll be done.
I was running a half marathon on Sunday. It was about mile 9. And when I say run, I'm not running like, say a Sam Justice. I am getting to the end. That is always my goal. I usually say I don't run a half marathon, I do one. I get there, and I'm currently running one a month for 12 months. I'm on number 7 this month. And so I was doing that on Sunday, and it was hot, and I was miserable. And as I passed the law enforcement officers who were holding back traffic in downtown Portland, you know, there are those of us who always thank them. I thanked them, and I said, I think I've changed my mind. Sometimes that's how I feel about having filed for this office. I could do this office. I could be your district attorney. However, I don't have a huge issue with the one that you have. I do know people who do, and by filing, I've given them an opportunity. Whether or not they took it, I've given them an opportunity to speak. And I believe that's important to the democratic process. I don't know if Mr. Berry appreciates it, But I did tell him last September that I was going to do that. He didn't. I would have told him why if he'd asked. But I think he was pretty confident in his position for a reason, because he's done a good job. And I'm proud to work for him. I still would like some changes. I've talked to him before. If he asks me about them, I'll talk to him again. But overall, you're pretty lucky.
Well, thank you. Again, thank you for having us here and the opportunity to talk with you. Again, I'm going to reiterate where I started. I love talking with the community about what we do and how we do it. Actually, other than that one tort claim question, I'm not sure where to go there, but it's fun to have questions about how we do what we do and where we are. I've been proud to be the district attorney since December 16th of 1996. I've been proud to be a part of the criminal justice system. I have some amazing people who work for me, very talented people. I'm going to shout out my support enforcement offices over there watching and listening to us today. I'll just point out those 5 people collect over $5 million a year in child support for families in our county. I'm looking forward to continuing to serve the community. I'm proud to have the support of the deputy DAs in my office. I'm proud to have the support of all of the heads of law enforcement who have given support in this campaign for my continued position as your district attorney. I'm proud to have the support of Crime Victims United and those who work with victims day in and day out. And it's a bit humbling to have people thank me for what we do. I always say, thank my office. I have a team that does all this. It's not just me. Hopefully I'm an effective leader. I think I've been an effective leader with law enforcement. I think I've been an effective leader in making us a team, not just the DA or the sheriff or a chief of police or a law enforcement officer pulling somebody over. We're all a team in seeing that our community is safe and seeing that we do the right things for the right reasons. Thank you.
This concludes the forum. Next week, we'll have the 2 commissioner candidates.
Okay, there you have it. AM 1260 KOIC. And if you want to watch this again, you can watch it. I think we have a comment.
Thank you both for a very interesting time today. Please remember, Kiwanis is a global organization of volunteers committed to improving the world, one child, one city at a time. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Okay, we are adjourned. So, there you heard it. The 2 candidates for county district attorney in Yamhill County. Now, next week, we are going to be having the live broadcast and the live video webcast of the candidates for county commission. And I'm sure there will be a lot of interest in that particular race. It's going to be next Thursday at noon, live broadcast on the radio and live video webcast. If you want to listen to this again, we will have both the podcasts available and a video webcast available, the video webcast will be available shortly by going to our website, KLYC.us, and also our, lost my train of thought, our website, KLYC.us, and our Facebook page, KLYC Radio. Don't you love live radio? That's what we've been doing today. Always mobile in Yamhill County. It's our goal to use the new media that's available, like video streaming and the internet, to serve our community and to get news and information out, to get information about events, to be there. If it's live, we want to be there. We talk about street level radio. This summer, you're going to start seeing what we've been talking about. AM 1260 KLYC, always mobile in Yamhill County, broadcasting live from the MAC Grand Ballroom Candidates Forum for District Attorney Candidates. AM 1260 KLYC, your station in Yamhill County. The Everly Brothers and Wake Up Little Susie.